We continue our 2024 performance review series here on Locked On Dolphins with a deep dive look at the tight end room from 2024.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL Draft lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special shout out and thank you to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. What time is it? It's game time. Today on the show, we're looking at tight ends. We did the offensive line performance review yesterday, looking specifically at not just was it good or bad, but instead it was with what is the trend and trajectory for the names that are under contract and not under contract. Should we be pressed about guys that aren't under contract or not? Not necessarily what was the degree of difficulty of their assignments, but just how frequently did they execute their assignment? And I'll say this tight end room, with the way that the Dolphins under Mike McDaniel and their offense has run, has been committed to trying to live out the vision of the wide zone, strong side, outside zone offense. This room is probably equally important to the success of the run game because of how frequently the Dolphins try to run on the edges. And there's just a little bitty problem with that. And that's this group was not particularly good this year. So the first thing I want to do is I do want to look at snap counts because you're going to get into conversations all off season long about the tight end position, upgrading certain spots, how Jonnu Smith fits in that puzzle as a player that was the success story of this room after it being a non-factor in the offense in its entirety from a passing game perspective the previous year. But there's workload here that is very robust. And I think if the Dolphins, frankly, were to lean into this is who we want to be, but we need to have the honest conversation about maybe not cutting corners and trying to go cheap on filling this specific role within it. There's opportunity here for a lot of improvement in a lot of different ways. So Jonnu Smith was the highest snap taker of this group. He took 55% of the Dolphins' offensive snaps this year. That equates to 500 or 626 snaps. That is the ninth highest snap total of any offensive player on the team. There were 4 offensive linemen that took higher snaps than Jonnu Smith. It was Aaron Brewer with 1138, Robert Jones 1078, Liam Eichenberg 1035. Those were the 3 players this year that exceeded 1,000 snaps for the team. And to just put that number in perspective, last year there was 1 player that had 1,000 snaps for the team on offense, and it was Tua Tagovailoa. So you had 3 players over 1,000 snaps: Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle at wide receiver 906 and 793 respectively. So Tyreek played 80% of the snaps, or would have been 80 if he finished the last game. Tyreek 79.61%, Jalen Waddle at 69.68% at 793 snaps. Teron Armstead at 820, very significant workload volume for him, 72% of snaps. Tua Tagovailoa and Devon Achane, 717 and 704. Jonnu Smith's the next highest name on the list. So Jonnu, 55% workload. He's your primary tight end. But let's put this number in perspective. The Dolphins also had Julian Hill take 514 snaps, which is 45%. And Durham Smythe took 364 snaps. So those 2 guys combined are almost 900 snaps of offense I'm not a math guy, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, but 514 plus 364 is 878 snaps. And that's before you even account for Alec Ingold, who had 337 snaps taken this season. So you add all of it up, Jonnu Smith, primary snap taker, but what is his role within the offense? And that's where I think you get run and pass orientation and personnel groupings. We're going to break the room down into two separate subcategories of the tight end position. And obviously, Alec's a fullback. I'm putting him in this conversation. But this offense has your traditional Y, which is your inline player, a tight end who has his hand in the dirt. And then it has its F, which is code for formation adjuster. And it's usually the last person in the personnel grouping. And it's the player that most frequently gets tagged with motions and sub alignments for different formational presentations. And that's what I put Jonnu Smith and I put Alec Ingold into, because I think it's important to note that Julian Hill and Durham Smythe combined for almost 900 snaps. And when you combine Jonnu Smith and Alec Ingold, those guys combined for over 950 snaps. So there's your highest snap takers, 1138 and 1078. So you have two separate subcategories of this room, which if you combine their snap counts together is effectively equal to full-time players. So when people mock Tyler Warren as an example, and I'm not saying that hey, the Dolphins need to draft Tyler Warren, but when Dolphins get mocked a name like Tyler Warren in a mock draft, please understand, if he's your every down Y tight end, that's based off of splitting between Julian and Durham, who effectively fill the same roles. You're talking a full-time player, and that would not account for any of Jonnu Smith's workload. So I just think that's proper framing going into, we're going to talk about the whys, not the actual, why did this happen whys, although we are going to explore that too. Dad mode in overtime today. But we're going to explore the why position first and look at Julian Hill, Durham Smythe, assessment of their performances, what their game grade trends look like as far as execution of assignment. That's coming your way next. And then we'll finish with the formation adjusters, the Jonnu Smith, Alec Ingold combination to finish the show today. So that's what's coming up next here on Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. Events are meant to be taken in live. It's part of the experience. So whether you're looking for sports, music, theater, or comedy, Game Time now makes it easier to get your tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, we're going to pull up the grade assessment week over week for the year. It's color-coded, so green is good and red is bad. It means green is what you were asked to do that week. You went above and beyond within the framework of what the offense called for. Again, it's not meant to describe how complex your assignments are, just whether what you were asked to do you successfully or unsuccessfully execute. And again, it's worth noting this room had some of the more high degree of difficulty assignments in the offense because of what they're asked to do from a passing game perspective, what they're asked to do from a blocking perspective, whether that's inline or in space or out on the edge. And the Y position, the guys that are Durham Smythe and Julian Hill, these are the guys that traditionally have their hands in the dirt. And these two players, I'll highlight them here so you can see these two rows. What is very apparent is the up and down nature of Julian Hill and the very extended below expectation performance grades that I have for Durham Smythe. So this was a very erratic room. Very infrequently did you get both of these guys performing above expectation in the same game. As a matter of fact, as I'm looking at it now, there were 2 games this year, just 2, where both of these players successfully performed above the expectation that they had from an assignment perspective. It was week 1 against Jacksonville and week 16 against San Francisco at home. The Dolphins obviously won both of those games. But what stands out about this position is the Dolphins will leave these guys in pass protection against defensive ends, where maybe they'll pull the guard and have the tight end who's going to square up on a defensive end, and he's going to try to get his hands fit, and he's going to set like he's blocking him in pass protection, and then he'll discard him. Usually he's going to discard him outside so that it creates a wider angle to get back to the quarterback. And the Dolphins will have a guard that pulls around to give run action, and then that guard picks up the end, and the tight end delay releases out into the flat. Jonnu Smith's role with that was a little bit more of like chip release, knock a guy into the tackle and then delay and get out, where Hill and Smythe were the outlets underneath for some of Miami's power pass stuff. So you have those kinds of obligations. You have run blocking assignments, both in line and in space. And then you have the receiving game aspect. Very little of the positive contributions that either of these guys made this year were in the passing game. And that's okay because Jonnu Smith exists. But at the same time, you watch some of these games and you watch the lack of separation down the field, inside and outside of structure. You watch the ball bounce off of these guys' hands when they are in tight coverage. And, Durham Smythe, very select opportunities. He had over 700 snaps last year in the offense. And 400 yards of receiving yardage total for Dolphins tight ends in all of 2023. So obviously the transition happens and Julian Hill takes the majority of these snaps. And when Julian Hill wasn't having the holding penalties or the formational penalties with the illegal motions and some of these, I think the context has been important to say, look, he's playing because he's a better option than Durham Smythe. And some of the penalties that he's had aren't really his fault as far as errors from other players. And at least one time he was assigned a penalty that was not even him on the punt team. It was Tanner Connor. But the grades, if it's not positive contributions from an inline blocking perspective and pass pro perspective, there are no positive contributions. And if you're going to get into the quote, I'd like to revisit the quote that Mike McDaniel answered when I asked him at training camp about the versatility of this room with a lot of different individualized skill sets. And Mike said that the versatility of this room, you turn the page, and that's the versatility of your offense. And I think as I review a group of players who Durham, I don't think did anything particularly well this season. He had he had Jacksonville, Tennessee. He was the only player in either the F or Y subsections that had a positively graded game against Tennessee. Everybody else was an abject disaster in that game. At San Francisco and Jets too. He had 4 games this year where he was above expectation at all as a guy who's taking 350 snaps. And was the guy last year who took over 700 snaps. Like that to me is a marquee player that if you want to upgrade from a Y tight end position, I'm still interested in rostering Julian Hill and seeing that through a little bit more. But this is the player that's getting $4.5, $5 million in salary cap allegations on an annual basis. And the book's kind of been written, and you've kept trying to put more responsibility on somebody's plate in this room. And not only has he not stepped up, his opportunities have regressed because he's getting passed by other players that have their own limitations. So Durham, I think he struggles with physicality. I think he struggles with the space aspect and framing guys out by the numbers when he's going to arc release or get out, when he's an inline player and he's trying to create a wall. He's very infrequent with the timing of his punch to be able to dictate terms at first contact. He usually gets bubbled back, and then that forces the back to bounce, or it forces the offensive lineman that's trying to fold around his seal block to have to get more depth. And now the linebacker runs over the top, and we're unblocked on the front side. So it's like these compounding issues that I can look at. Julian Hill's a lot more of assignment and execution standpoint, where I don't know that Durham Smythe physically has a skill set that is going to shine in this role within this offense. But the F position is much more of a either backfield blocking assignment or a pass game perspective. And we know that book for him. So 4 positively graded games for Durham within his expectation. And this is an important piece of the offense, this player. So that adds up with some, what I think is going to be a very easy decision for me if I were running the Dolphins this offseason, as far as what kind of personnel changes I would make to start trimming fat off the roster and start transitioning to get more competition into these room. I think Julian Hill showed enough. Now, he was not good against the Jets, and he was not good in a number of other games. He was a disaster against Tennessee this year. He was a disaster against Arizona this year. But you really look at from Green Bay through Cleveland. It's kind of like a 5-6 game stretch here towards the back half of the season, where I thought he settled into a role as a blocker pretty well. The penalties were the big spotlight early. He had a fumble in the passing game. You don't get any kind of grade adjustments for whether you're a passing game contribution or a blocking. So a half point positive grade is the same whether you're pass blocking a defensive end or whether you're combination up to a linebacker in the run game on the front side of an outside zone run, or you're running a route. So as long as you see these grades and you understand, like, he has a lot of very close to neutral grades with a few games that are high from a positive perspective. I thought he played really well against San Francisco. I thought he played really well against Jacksonville to help neutralize those powerful defensive ends they have. And you see the games that are really low, like Arizona and Tennessee and the second Jets game. There's just too much variance to tie to this player to be your marquee Y player. So if it were me, and I don't want to do the whole offseason blueprint, which is what I would do for every roster move and building a 53 for next season, but I would say with this subsection of the tight end room, I would cut Durham Smythe, and I would bring in either a well-regarded rookie tight end and a veteran to compete, or I would bring in an inline player that if you're just going to accept that your wide position's not going to have passing game contributions, I want a guy who's consistent with the execution of his assignments. Because it's not physical ability for Julian Hill, but it is I'm a year 2 player from Campbell. And instead of just blocking some of these guys as they declare themselves on the edges to me, I have in my head what the player I'm supposed to block is based off of the pre-snap look before they run motion and the picture changes. And then you're turning loose guys unblocked on the front side of plays. And that's what you really saw a lot of against the Jets the second time around. So there's a conversation to be had about getting more overlap with these skills instead of what I think is a really significant group of like specialized skill sets that now you kind of have performance and play call tells based on who's out there in what position, because your wide tight ends aren't passing game contributors. And Jonnu Smith obviously is a big time passing game contributor, but what he brings you from a blocking perspective is a little bit more muddy. So that's kind of where my head goes for the next step for this room. But we got to look at the F players as the formation adjusters in Jonnu Smith and Alec Ingold. That's coming up next here on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football, and that's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money watching the games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or you want your cash quickly, Prize Picks has you covered. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people love Prize Picks. Here's a special for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today. Use code Locked On NFL. Get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's download the Prize Picks app today. Use code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. I should probably specify too with the Y group. Julian Hill for the season finished just marginally below expectation for his entire body of work. That was a lot of roller coaster grades. I do think he is a dirty work player that did some things that kind of get glossed over with the TV copy. But at the end of the day, if you're a one-dimensional player and you're irregular with your execution of your assignments, it's a spot that's going to get put under the microscope. Durham Smythe was more limited in his snap opportunities, with, again, only 364 snaps played this season, which was 32% of the Dolphins' offensive snaps. But he rated in the same stratosphere as both Robert Jones and Liam Eichenberg as far as starters on the offense. So that for me makes that a very clear position group that needs extra attention. The Y tight end position. The F, I'm willing to be comfortable with this group because I think Jonnu Smith has earned it. With the 55% of snaps that he played this past year and the chemistry that he had with Tua Tagovailoa and how he's really able to impact both hook routes underneath, crossers in the middle of the field, get him the ball as a screen player and create with the ball in his hands. There's a lot of really good things that happened with Jonnu Smith this season. And I think if you're able to get a little bit more diversification with whoever you bring in from the Y, if they can dip their toe into this end of the pool just a little bit, I think it solves a lot of your problems because you're a lot less predictable based on who's out there if you have a more significant overlap with what your Y players do and what your F players do. Alec Ingold's a tough one for me. Because there's obviously he's an outstanding presence for this football team. He is a leader. When you account for special teams, he played over 400 snaps this season. And this team was predominantly a 21 offense in 2023. And then they kind of lost the ability to run the ball, and he kind of got mitigated. As far as a usage perspective, he got banged up as well. So it really watered down on what he was able to provide for the team because a lot of what he did at a high level, you just weren't able to line up and do. Case in point, there is a direct correlation between Alec Ingold's snap usage and Austin Jackson's availability. I'm going to read you the snap counts through the Austin Jackson injury. And then, Alec missed 2 games against the Rams and against the Raiders with an injury and then came back against New England and they kind of weaned him in, but even like down the stretch for the final 6 weeks of the season. So 29, 24, 26, 18, which again, that was a game, that 18 snaps game was against Tennessee where you fell behind and you weren't really going to just come out and keep playing 21. 42, 27, 27, and then 19 against Buffalo. So more often than not, you're in the mid 20s, mid to high 20s. We had a 42 snap mark against New England. Come back, we play 9 games for the second game against New England. We only had 2 games with more than 18 snaps the rest of the way. 18, 17, 16, 25, 23, 17. So this is where Alec Ingold is well compensated as a fullback in this offense. I would love to find a way to get more of a snap volume that's less 21 personnel dependent for Alec Ingold. If he's a player that is going to be in the same kind of stratosphere of where Durham Smythe is. But that really underscores the investment in this room for me of Ingold was a free agent signing that you got a contract extension to. Durham Smythe is somebody who's hung around here forever and has gotten a couple contract extensions. Those two guys combined, you get a player who I don't think fits particularly well with the degree of difficulty of what this room wants to be. And then you have another player who is very apparently game script and game flow and personnel specific with Alec Ingold. I think Alec Ingold did a fine job this year, all things considered. And he had a number of well-graded games. I'll pull up the grades for those of you who are watching on YouTube. Well represented with above expectation grades against Jacksonville and Seattle and the first New England game and the Buffalo 2 game and the Green Bay game. Played well, played physical, played well against San Francisco. But you had some under expectation performances, and that includes against Indianapolis with the fumble. That includes the Houston game. That includes the Tennessee game. So you just consider he's a player who, if the entire objective of your F position is flexibility and diversity, would love to find a pathway for him to impact the game a little bit more outside of just 21 personnel, whether that is as a second kind of pseudo tight end who can be flexed and play in space a little bit more. That would be what I would be exploring if I were the Dolphins as far as it pertains to Alec Ingold. But from top to bottom, when you look at this room and the grades across the board, Alec and Jonnu Smith graded above expectation. Julian Hill graded marginally below expectation. Durham Smythe, same stratosphere from a grades perspective. Actually, technically on a per snap basis, graded lower than either Robert Jones or Liam Eichenberg did. So you take that, and then you take a couple of middle tier contracts for players that were the lower snap takers. I mean, they were your third and fourth volume snap takers in that room, and they're the highest compensated guys. Like, done that, set off a flag. And then on top of that, they're all very specialized skill sets. I think you can sew this room together next year. This is the point I'm really trying to drive home. I think you can sew this room together next year by having a player that does a little bit of the F stuff and a little bit of the Y stuff. And if you can find that player who can do that at a high level, whether it's a free agency, whether that's a trade, whether that's a player in the draft, and it's a really good tight end class. I'm not saying that player and that solution has to be Tyler Warren from Penn State at 13 overall. Not saying that at all. But that should be the objective for this room. The good news is I think you can find one player and you can create a lot more unpredictability with this group. And the performance can be measured by being less predictable, and that will help everybody with the execution of some of these high degree of difficulty assignments that this room has. As what Mike McDaniel told me in training camp, it's kind of it's the room that is the straw that stirs the drink of the offense. But what you can't have is this complacency with the guys that you've invested in being the lowest snap takers and they're getting lapped by young guys, but you you have a guy like Julian Hill, who was an undrafted free agent, and before him it was Tanner Connor, and we just try to kind of cut the line and find an athletic guy that we think we can develop, and that development with the young guys really hasn't happened yet. So I think you kind of need to up the ante on the new player, the new blood that you're bringing in to fill that hybrid type of role. You do that, I think you can cook with gas with this room next year with Jonnu Smith, Alec, Ingold. If you have a different primary why, and then Julian Hill is the special teams player and the inline tight end 2, who's technically the tight end 3, I'd be pretty comfortable with this room for 2025. That's my thoughts on it. And that's how I graded this room this past year. Hope you guys enjoyed this look at the tight end performance review for the 2024 NFL season. I'm Kyle Krabs. You can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I'm out of here. Go Fins.